All right, we are live with the Loc Hangout, and I'm getting communication that it's actually working, like everything is on. So for those who have joined us, who you've found the link, you've gotten your email and you've waded through all of the hoops and circles and everything, we appreciate that you're joining us today. We have a great discussion ahead of us. We're going to jump right in and then we'll do some introductions and things like that a little later on because some people may join late. But our topic today is Don't Rage Against the Machine. And this isn't the reference to the 90s band that I got to see. We're not sitting around going to talk about some of our favorite 90s music. This is actually talking about the use of AI and machine technology in specifically the localization industry, but we're going to talk about it in the world at broad and then really look at applications and how this affects us. We do have a couple ways that you can communicate with us. The first and most direct one is the live chat that you're watching on YouTube. To the right there's a chat box. Feel free to type in questions. One of the reasons that we use the Google Hangouts platform is so that we can hear directly from you while we're doing this. Instead of just having a talking head speak to you, this is interactive and we really try to get into your comments and thoughts and facilitate a discussion here. We also have the hashtag #LOC Hangouts on Twitter, and I'm checking to make sure I just said that correctly. Yeah, it's #LOC Hangout. And then we have some people who also submitted some questions beforehand, and we'll be jumping into there. So very briefly, by way of introduction, if you guys could say your name and one technology that you're relying on every day that is newer, one machine that you're not raging against, but that has been incorporated into your work life. So Connor, can you introduce yourself and talk about one machine that's made a difference in your life right now?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Connor Robinson. I'm a solutions architect with Moravia. So what that means is I actually work with our clients and I understand their requirements when it comes to translation, localization.
Okay, and then what's your machine?
What's my machine?
Yep.
Let's see, has to be the mobile phone. You know, I volunteer for a bunch of groups and they all have all the information in there, whether it's soccer games or you name it. So I got to be on there, keep track of everything.
Sweet. Everything's mobile. All right, Jim, what's your machine? Or introduce yourself first, say your name.
Hey guys, I'm Jim Compton. I would say, and this may be a system of machines, but cloud-based computing.
What type of services are you using on such a thing?
Well, collaborative, even like document writing. I mean, I find that you know, it seems like we've had it forever, but it's not really that old. And what a huge difference it makes in just being able to collaborate on things like a document with people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I use it every day.
And Eric, Mr. Vogt.
Hey everyone, I'm Eric Vogt. I'm a solutions director here at Moravia. I'd have to say that I was just thinking about this question because you didn't tell us you're going to ask this question to start with. So I was just thinking across my head, like what could be included. And since I started in this career in language services, Google has been founded and started. So this Hangout wouldn't have existed at all. The opportunity for us to even have this live conversation. Mobile phones, Facebook, Amazon, Uber that I can take or Lyft. Any of these technologies have made already had a huge impact on us, and most of them for the good. I would make an argument that most of it has been for the good. There's been change, which has been hard, but we'll talk about that this hour.
Yeah, and I'm Michael Stevens. I'm the cruise director for this, and I started using Grammarly. You guys heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of fun. It really shows what a terrible email writer.
I thought your emails had improved lately.
Have they gotten better? I actually think there's been a rather visible improvement. Yeah, I won't go into the details on that. So let's get into our topic here. This isn't the New York Times. Connor, what was this? It is the New York Times. The New York Times ran an article just last weekend that was talking about this subject. And I'm going to read the opening line and let you guys sort of give your first thoughts there. It says self-driving vehicles could upend the transportation sector and eliminate 1 million jobs or more. Algorithms that decode MRIs put a whole medical subfield at risk, and the list of professions and sectors soon to be obsolete grows steadily day by day. What are these machines that are impacting our work? Can we start there? Can you talk about a few of those?
I'd like to jump in first on this one, because this whole thing has been going on for a while. In fact, even all the way back to 1589, there's been resistance to new technologies. Queen Elizabeth had the opportunity to grant a patent to a mechanical knitting machine, but she refused because it would put workers out of work. The manual knitters needed to be protected. I think the word Luddite, which we still use today to describe kind of anti-technologists, came in the 1800s, and they would break into fabric mills and smash the machines because they were trying to protect the jobs. I think even when you look at more recently, there was recently some data released about e-commerce jobs destroying retail. And it turns out that the data doesn't support that. There's actually more jobs in retail now than there was 10 years ago. Total, even if you look at e-commerce plus regular commerce, the overall growth is higher, and they're higher paying jobs. So generally speaking, going to Uber, there was 75,000 less rides by yellow cabs in New York City, according to a recent report, but 210,000 more rides were ordered. So when you add new technologies, you're not necessarily only taking away from a previous technology, but you're adding new capabilities or new demand. You're unlocking new demand that wasn't previously there. And I think that's the important thing to remember whenever we're thinking about this whole thing, is that the economics every single time actually benefits workers. Typically, they end up with better, higher paying jobs that are less manual and less mundane. They have to be more skilled, but they're better opportunities for them overall. So that's, I had to put in something referencing something.
You want to alleviate some fear that this has been around for a while, and it's not new, and there is some hope in the midst of this transition. So self-driving cars, that's one. And I think there are some ways that even that technology will impact our industry. It's the movement to voice outside of text.
Well, yeah,
right.
Let's look at that for a second. Self-driving cars. One of the problems with highways is that the highway capacity if every car has the minimum safe distance between the car ahead of it, it can handle some X capacity of cars safely. Actually, in real life, that breaks down much faster, probably around 40%. 40 to 50% of its nominal capacity they start clogging up and becoming traffic jams. Why? Because human drivers suck. I mean, they speed up, they brake, they overreact, they change lanes.
Maybe in Denver.
Seattle drivers are better. No, but humans are impulsive and reactive. And so theoretically, with driverless cars, or let's say cars that are assisted by automated drivers, in the meantime, could theoretically handle higher capacity on the existing roadwork. For the existing roads can handle a higher capacity more safely than what's going on today. And that opens up different jobs that are possible because more people can get around faster. Maybe their commute is shorter. Maybe they have less costs in owning a car. Fewer people have to buy cars. That releases a lot of income potential that can be redirected in other places.
I like that thinking. I mean, the way I've thought about it is, if you were to really believe that any technology would, eliminate need for people to do things, you have to believe that there's actually a finite number of problems in the world, right? That there's a finite number of problems. And if you believe that, I mean, actually, that's a pretty exciting proposition, right? That we would somehow live in a world where there's no problems solved. But if we agree that there's probably not a finite number of problems, this just says we have to be flexible when one problem goes away, that we have to focus on another problem.
Yeah, so we're getting some feedback here. One is a couple book recommendations from Daniel Canton, The Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford, and Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. The Yellow Day Star has called out a couple things that these changes in technologies are sector specific. Some sectors move to almost full automation pretty quickly, and there is a negative impact on workers in that sector, such as coal mining, right? That everyone loves to throw in this quote here, and I hear it all the time, that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. That's sort of plug all of that conversation in there. But then this fact that like automation does lead to maybe it's 1/10 of the current jobs we have, and that we are understood. We only need 1/10 of them.
So what that means, in my view, is that organizations and society as a whole need to take a responsibility for their workers. If Uber came along, it sort of promoted the gig economy. People can drive cars, earn money when they want, but they have a responsibility to those individuals. And also, if you think about the localization industry, if we begin to introduce technologies like machine translation, we need to help translators retrain, or give them the opportunity to go to additional courses that would promote their careers. So there is a responsibility that these corporations have.
And Connor, you called out one thing from that article, and the name of the article in the New York Times is "Get Ready for the Technological Upheaval by Expecting the Unimagined." And you mentioned one ongoing training that was being done. Can you highlight that for the rest of us?
Yeah, so towards the end of the article, there's a description of what Denmark did in the 90s, which they adopted this sort of program of flex security. So you give people the security in an organization or in a society. You give them security that they will have a job if they go away and train themselves. If they choose to go and learn about machine learning algorithms, or they choose to go and learn about artificial intelligence, and move themselves forward in the job market, they'll have something to come back to. And I think having those sort of programs within organizations or within states and governments is really important.
Mm-hmm. So it's been said that we're in a deep blue moment. Have you guys heard that analogy? And that's referring back to was it 1997 Kasparov? Eric, do you want to give the background of that?
Well, Deep Blue was the name of the IBM computer that beat Kasparov, and that was that famous moment where an AI, if you want to think about it, beat a chess master. But I think what's also interesting is Kasparov initially had made a comment to the effect of, "I just got beaten by a $10 million alarm clock." But he also thought about it a little bit, and he ends up being a huge proponent of this idea of centaurs, like human and computers working together. I think that has actually already happened for the language industry. I would say it happened over 20 years ago, in the early 90s, when Trados was coming out and people were starting to use machine translation. They were already starting to use automation to facilitate the way that transactions were done. I want to use an example of one of the loc engineers who reported to me, I think in 98 or something like that. There was a new tool came out that did filtering automatically, so that she didn't have to do DOS scripts all the time to filter parse files, because that's the way that we used to do it back then. You were using regular expressions, and all this stuff was done automatically. The filters just pop the file in, and the filter gets done. And she said, "Our jobs are gone, and we're going to lose our jobs. Like, how you're basically replacing us with software." And chuckle, and she's still in the loc industry, and everybody is has more jobs as loc engineers than there were then. The main emphasis here is that, well, getting back to Kasparov, Kasparov recognized that humans think differently than computers do. Computers don't have a soul. They don't have goals. They don't have like meaning in life.
Do humans have a soul?
Well, okay, different conversation. That's next week's Hangout. Do humans have a soul, and if so, what is it? So I think there already has. I mean, first of all, it's just another form of automation. It's an enhancement of capabilities that humans will do. But working together, we're much more effective than we would be otherwise. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about localization industry, because that's what we're here for. I would say that there's basically 6 different types of automation that affect us. One is automation, which is about like routinely doing dumb stuff that it takes a long time and is slow. The second is, and that one of the biggest places there is in routing, like transaction management, because somewhere there's a job to be translated and somewhere there's a translator to do that job. All the steps in between the job and the translator are basically just not value-added work. All that stuff is just moving things to file transforms, pushing files, scheduling it, following up, blah, blah, blah. So that being able to automate those two together really makes the translator add more value, because of the whole task, bigger percentage of it is the value add that the translator is giving. So I'm a big proponent of that. Second is with regards to halo effect, and this has to do with customer service and the customer experience. And I think one of the comments in the thread about this was talking about how we can target translations to individuals rather than just, translate everything and just cross your fingers. There's more and more an emphasis to get to the customer and figure out what they need, and then translate that, respond to the problems that they're having in the language that they need at the time that they need it, rather than just sort of do this episodic translation. So the more information we can get about usability, of user usability, which is a hugely complicated task that requires a lot of boring work, the more people can spend their localization dollars more effectively.
Before you get on to the third point, this halo effect, the automation that's used in it, it's actually makes the process more human. Because one of my criticisms of our industry and how we've developed it is something like the Microsoft standards became the gold standard, and it was all that was required for someone to be able to do a tech translation. As long as they had familiarity with that, certification, whatever it is. When you're able to route things to individuals for that halo effect, you're actually valuing the individual's contribution more, rather than saying, okay, you're in this large pool of vanilla people who have this standard. Now we know you do something specific.
That's right. I think when these centaur relationships work, they are elevating what it is about the person that's adding value, right? And I think that being said, like, what that says to me is that not all of these, types of centaurs are the same, right? Not all centaurs are created equal, and the way in which the human and the technology interact is almost as important as the technology itself. And for the time being, that mix still seems to be a human design problem to solve.
Right. I can think of just a few off the top of my head. When you're talking about the halo, this is the code around a person that supports them. The localization manager trying to work within the ecosystem of budgets that they have and the environment, the tools that they have, the products that they have. How do they know what to translate and what priorities to give it? How can they best utilize their available budget to translate things that are going to have the maximum ROI for their company? That's one decision set. Another decision set is with regards to somebody trying to get those jobs to the right person with the right qualifications and manage and deal with them. The most efficient streaming programs are ones that are exception managements. They'll get routed everywhere automatically, but then somebody's job is to deal with the exceptions, to make the phone calls when the routing doesn't work. The third is the translator experience themselves, where the more of a wrapper you can put around their experience, both in terms of prep and training, context, support for the context, machine, like the Grammarlies of every language in the world, the tools, the spell checkers, all these things are tools that surround the translator and make their experience more effective. And those are just three, like those are just three examples. And I predict that as AI and as technology advances, each of those roles will be better supported with better, more up-to-date information, and that will make the value that particular worker is contributing much more valuable to both the company that they're working for and to just the whole language services industry, really.
Mm-hmm. So for those folks who just joined the Google Live Hangout, we've got Eric Vogt out of Boulder. I said Denver earlier. Jim Compton, who is out of Denver, and Connor Robinson. Connor, you're in Denver as well. This is like the Colorado connection today. I had no idea we were opening ourselves up to that. We have a couple ways. We've got a good discussion going on the live chat. Feel free to jump in there, ask questions, object, throw something against the wall there for us. You can find that in the YouTube link. We also have a hashtag, which is #LocHangout. And we have some comments. Yeah, someone wrote Rocky Mountain Mafia. You guys are encouraging them. I'm going to start. Tom Rowland put this comment in ahead of the live hangout. He said he sees AI pulling together various tools, and this was part of where Eric was going in describing the different types of automation. Varying tools in typical translation environments, pre-post processing tools, translation memory, machine translation, and terminology. And this would create a more cohesive whole, increasing translator productivity and driving what he says real costs down. What do you guys think of that vision of where we're going and what it's about?
I would agree that that's definitely part of it, right? I think that there's lots of value that can be provided in applying, AI to existing processes. I think it's also interesting to take a step back and look at like the big process of what localization is trying to even accomplish, and ask, how can AI be applied in ways that aren't being applied at all? I mean, for example, upstream with even the creation of content. Can content be created intelligently based on its how much it's predicted to perform and return certain global outcomes?
Right. Did you guys see the article about Yelp this week, where the company ran automated computer-generated AI restaurant reviews based upon the reviews that were already done? And in some instances, they test them, like, do you find this helpful, this and that? And they actually found the machine written ones pretty helpful. Some of them had the machine crashed and it wrote like, I was there and I fell or something, like not like, it was weird. Like there were some weird things that came out of it too, but anyway.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because I mean, that's sort of a famous thing when some of these AI systems fail. They sort of fail in spectacular ways, and like some review, you can see the auto generated review thing generating some pretty seriously bad consequences, I would think.
Where I think the Tom described that sort of unified set of tools and technologies, where I think it's interesting and tied to the Yelp example as well, is where and this is again where I think AI is going to be able to, well, machine learning and other techniques and technologies will be able to be woven in, is building in semantic information into the stream. So using natural language understanding techniques like sentiment analysis and things like that to augment the overall localization flow and the creation of global content, where in a stream a system is able to identify to some degree the meaning It could be, you could imagine in a customer support chat, there's a machine in the background listening to the chat, and it immediately starts to pop up useful links. It knows the entities in the chat. It can help a customer service agent, really get to the nitty-gritty of the problem. And there's all sorts of examples like that. So I think where it's getting really interesting and why we shouldn't, we should be prepared for the changes, bringing in the semantics to our content and the content that we're handling every day.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. The customer support example.
Yeah, I was going to give another similar example where in terms of generating content for on demand, basically, you can look at call center input, like look at the data about what people are calling in about or searching for even, and see what, so they might pop up in Turkey. You're seeing suddenly a lot of people asking about a certain topic. That can trigger a response to translate a help article or a knowledge base article, both for the call center staff as well as for the users on the web page in Turkish immediately, because you've immediately seen that there's a spike in that particular problem for that particular language. And then you can decide, is this common enough to translate it, or is it just enough to create the content for that particular language? That might be cheaper than creating content for all languages at the same time.
Yeah, and so Daniel on the chat here, he was talking about, he just chatted and said there's Microsoft's already got a machine learning engine that analyzes user feedback with a high level of confidence, including some sentiment analysis. And I think that's a really good example. But I think key is what we do with that sentiment analysis, but also how because we started off talking about change and how we need to be prepared for AI and machine learning. I think what a lot of it is about is getting really good at capturing the data that we have at our disposal. Obviously the Googles and Microsofts have a lot of data and are able to really teach their machine learning algorithms in a really, really creative way. But they need that underlying data. So I think organizations, and they already are, is getting a handle on what information they have and what value they can extract out of the information. And that's the way to add value through machine learning and AI.
You're bringing up a really good point, though, Connor, because you said the data that they're using to train, and that's the one limiting factor on all AI or all machine translation, is that without relevant data, you're not going to be training anything useful. And it goes both from routing, like how do we route things? It talks about how do we get information about that Turkish user who's having, or the group of people who's suddenly having a spike. The data has to be there in the first place in order to detect predictable patterns. Now, there's also so the algorithm can't think; it can only make associations. It just does the things that we tell them to do. Computers don't have a sense of thought, right? They don't think like we do. And that's why they can enhance us so much, because they can do and find things that we don't have the time to get through. But in terms of the data, that's a huge thing for us, because we can say, well, you can have an MT, Google MT for Spanish with Neural is pretty great. It's pretty good, but that doesn't help you at all in terms of accessing a market in Pashtun or something where there just simply isn't a corpora enough for that. So I think there's several different places where humans will be contributing, partly in training MTs and also customizing it. It's one thing to have a kind of a generic voice, but there is a really strong incentive for global brands to have their own voice and to have their own terminology and their own style, because they want to establish themselves as a global brand. They need to have that voice. So humans I predict, will be much more involved with that brand identity and the training and developing, and then on the post end, fixing or QAing or escalating or dealing with the exceptions management. The abundance that's created there, the opportunity for much more stuff to be done more cheaply, doesn't necessarily hurt the market. I think that actually creates even bigger demand for workers who are able to add more value and to a broader market. So
I agree. I would like to challenge the notion that that the sort of the long-term role of humans is in correcting, the mistakes that the machines make. I mean, I think that's definitely true for the time being, and in our industry specifically, there's this idea that, oh, the machines won't be perfect at doing this. But I think like the data problem will get solved, right? There's more sources of capturing data all the time, and we have a responsibility to think about what is the actual long-term relationship between technology and humans when the day comes, and I'm not saying if, when the day comes that, like, for example, a machine is able to translate every human language perfectly.
You're talking about universal translator, or are you talking about some kind of semantic superstructure that would eliminate the need for translating into new languages? I would experience, the way I see it is MT still needs some corpora to start with, and then can...
Sure. Yeah, but with every person in the world becoming, having closer access to like the internet and being able to type to one another, like I think the corpora grows every day, right? So I think to think that there will be, languages for which there will not be enough material to train an engine, that may be true today, but I would assert that will not be true in the future.
I would also point out who owns that data, and it matters like who controls the development then, because Google has an enormous amount of material because of all the material that it finds on the web, and it can harvest stuff from our emails and from our Google Docs if it wants to. What I'm struck with is that you can't just be a random company and expect to get that kind of data for your small division. That kind of data power is really in the hands of a very small number of people right now.
Right. Well, one of the things I heard Jim pushing back on was the fact that correcting the machine is the extent of our role, right? Like,
well, in your case, the machine correcting you, because your Grammarly is fixing your...
There are a lot of people correcting me, including machines, yes.
So it goes both ways. Yeah.
It goes both ways, but is there a different relationship that would exist?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, I'm concurring to some degree with Jim's challenge that this is, if you fixate on the post-editing step as a kind of where we're going with all this, you're missing a lot of what is really going on. There's a lot more happening here. But we could have a completely separate debate over like where the data is coming from and what that means for how you're training this stuff. It's one thing to say that it exists and therefore the problem will be solved. It's another thing to say that the economic and behavioral incentives are aligned to make that happen. So if you're in the automotive industry, for example, you're trying to make an MT that's going to be specific to, let's say, Ford. I'm thinking of Henry Ford here because he's one of the first sort of visionaries when it comes to automation. If Ford is trying to optimize their MT, all that corporate, and they're trying to get it for their market in, let's say, Nigeria, where is he going to get that corpora from? Where? He can't just harvest it from the web in general. I suppose they could maybe buy some of it from somebody like Google who may have done some translations already or figured out some general engines and then modify it, customize it. But they'll still need to, as I mentioned earlier, sort of correct or enhance the brand voice or the subject, the vertical, the specific narrow area of content that particular market entails. And because markets are constantly evolving, I'd see that constantly having to be done. I don't see computers can only look backwards. They can only look at what has already happened. They're not going to be able to anticipate sort of what the trendy terminology is going to be in the next, or maybe not. Maybe I will be proven wrong in a few years, but But the way the algorithms work, they have to start with something. There has to be an input, then the algorithm is a box, and there's an output. Humans can anticipate with the help of computers of what might be coming down the pipeline, but those humans still need to be there. Let me use another example. This is on the financial sector. One of my favorite books is called The Black Swan. Is about the Black Swan effect, and it's about the financial markets. And we saw in the crash of 2008 that the markets were going really, really great, and then all of a sudden they completely collapsed. And why? There were a lot of algorithms doing a lot of trading, and there were a lot of people using the advice of computers to anticipate the future, and they didn't understand or care about the underlying things that are going on. The Black Swan effect is an idea that because nobody's ever seen a black swan, therefore no black swans should exist. Certain patterns will happen over time, and then something will happen to change all that. And the more that an algorithm perfects sort of the predictive ability with the data that it has, the more likely it's going to keep going in the same direction, and it's not going to see sort of substantive or foundational changes going on that are going to dramatically prove them wrong. So just I'd say that the crash of 2008 is a warning to not trust algorithms too much in their predictive ability to solve our problems for us.
Okay,
it's almost an argument against translation memory too. You could use that same argument against translation memory, right?
They often do need to be re-examined and cleaned, right? Yep. There's some maintenance. So it's not so much an argument against it, but just recognizing the limitations.
Yeah. And with data as a whole, I mean, if you're working on a machine learning problem, you can take a big subset of data that you have in your organization, you can build, you can apply an algorithm to it. And without you really knowing, you're getting some predictions from the machine learning engine that are incorrect. You have to, a human has to be in there testing the algorithm. Similarly to a TM, your human has to be in there looking at the TM. Is it corrupted anymore? Is it getting corrupted? Is it really performing the way it should be performing? And the same thing is with machine learning. It needs that supervision.
I think there's an interesting correlation between the algorithms that are predicting how the market is going and actually the Kasparov Deep Blue story. What I find interesting is that was sort of framed as a man versus machine, challenge, right? Can a human win or will a machine win? And when the machine won against the human, I find it really interesting that the human that was beat came up with the idea, no, that's the wrong even question to ask, right? Because if you pair me with a machine, I can beat any human or machine. And if I'm not a big historian in chess, but I understand like when Kasparov would run these games that were like machine assisted, that just added a really interesting dynamic to the game where people would try to bring different human machine combinations to the table. But his core assertion that a human and a machine are superior to a human or a machine turns out to be right? The centaur is the secret weapon in the game of chess, and that may be true with regard to
I want to highlight
financial industry also.
Shift a bit. Some of the conversation going on at our chat. Some people have brought up the Microsoft presentation translator app. I'm not sure if you all have seen this. I have a friend who's working on a similar product here locally in Seattle, where you get up and you oftentimes will provide the first draft of your talk to this. You get up, you're able to go speak, and it's able to provide real-time automated interpretation to people listening to you speak. Pretty cool functionality there. Daniel Canton says at some point, this reminds me of the Babelfish from the Hitchhiker's Guide, which when you get a chance to reference Hitchhiker's Guide, you do that. We've got comments, if you want to mention us on Twitter or check us out there or put a comment in there, it's # Hangout. We have the chat going, and I've got Jim Compton, who's there, Connor Robinson, and Eric Vogt. We've got this question, which I think is probably a good time because we've sort of been out there. Sako Eaton said, how do we introduce these concepts to groups where they're not already established? So like Eric said, there's an issue of access to data. There's certain things, but where do you start when companies are saying there's this trend going to AI, or a freelancer who's listening to us, a freelance translator right now? How do I get my teeth into this?
Well, I'm gonna. I was hanging out with some friends looking at a giant art car, and the guy had done some amazing welding on the thing, and I asked him, like, how do I get started with welding? Should I take a class somewhere? Should I do something? He's like, you know what? I've tried that, but the best thing to do is just go buy a cheap welder and just play with it. Just try to build something.
I also like the way you snuck in the Burning Man reference too. That's cool.
Since that's on TV, I can't deny it anymore. That's true. I got caught on TV. So yeah, I mean, in actual fact, now, okay, here's another reference. A friend of mine had made a comment about how nobody wants to buy software. Nobody wants to buy tools. You don't buy a camera because you want to own a camera. You're always buying and using these tools because you want to achieve a goal. And I think software designers have been doing this for a while, where more and more they try to develop a product that doesn't require you needing a user guide. You just start using it, and the tool itself will start engaging with you, and you can build your skills as you go. So I think two factors. One is the software is coming to you as the end user. Second is just try and do. That's just jump in and start using it. Almost all translators right now already have the ability to plug into Google Translate, for incredibly little amount of money, can have a vast amount of content provided to them. Not just Google, but many other MT tools are available either for free or for very cheap to assist the translator. And then if they want more customized or more specific things, then the system needs to provide like a higher quality output. But I think any translator in the 21st century needs to be prepared to deal with a translator assist environment. So yeah, who's a translator? That's funny.
To answer that question, my view is that it's really important to understand what the organization that you're in, what their business goals are, and tie what you're doing to those and the business value that you want to generate from diving into something like these. I totally agree with the roll up your sleeves and just get started. But before doing that, it should be really clear in your mind, like, what am I trying to do here? What's my end goal? In the machine learning space, it's super important to really know right up front, before you go gathering data or starting tinkering with algorithms, is to know, what am I trying to predict? What is it? What outcome am I trying to generate from gathering all this information and applying various the best algorithms that I can find that will do the job. And if that's done, then that's really, really, really helpful, because further down the line, and it's the same with with implementing any technology, really, before too long, when you come to change, there's the question of the age-old questions of, do I have enough budget, or where is the budget going to come from to pay for this, to implement in my organization? And to have a really reasonable budget conversation, you need to be able to show your ROI and the value. If you don't have that, then you're kind of fishing a little bit.
Yeah, I love. I mentioned the statement before from Tom Rowland that real costs are important in this, because it's overly simplistic to say, hey, I'm going to just get the stuff I'm doing now cheaper. Because there is some level of investment, there's some level of partnership, even time. If you're going to just take a piece and say, I am going to just try it, buy the welding kit and go for it, the time that is involved with that. is a cost as well.
Yeah, because you'll get the welding kit, and if you don't have the right mask, or I'm just going to go with this analogy, the right tools, it might not quite work for you, but you're learning as you're going along.
Yep.
Right? You're giving yourself the opportunity to learn, and there's a huge value in that. But then at some point you hit a wall, and then it's like, oh wait, I need additional types of metals and additional types of materials. I got to go buy those. And can I really afford those? Am I in it to win it, or am I just going to sort of back off here and see what happens?
So Eric, you mentioned some of the Google tools. You mentioned, I believe, sort of voice to text, that assistance. Jim, what are some other areas that may be lower cost ways to engage?
For whom?
For seeking out this machine learning AI, the centaur approach.
I guess if you're a translator, I think one of the good things is that there seems to be a trend in cat tools to be building that, bringing that to you as a feature in the tools. And I think that's a really interesting, for translators to definitely, get their hands dirty with, right? Actually working with an environment that allows them to work with machine translation also. I'm sure a lot of people are doing that already.
Like
some of these
MT.
that's a super good example. And I think it's also a good example where there was quite a bit of thought that went into how can we make the interaction between the human and the machine like acceptable to the human being, right? So that it's actually empowering, feels empowering to the human being, as opposed to you have a robot slave master that you are serving.
You're talking about your protocol droid, your human cyborg relationship officer.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's true. I mean, we as humans are going to reject certain types of sort of AI environments that we find uncomfortable just by, for example, call center. If you call a call center and you're talking to a robot, or even worse, a robot calls you, the negative customer experience can be extremely high. And so certain types of things that are okay. Perfect example to segue into just a tiny example about the automation thing. ATMs were introduced into the market in 1970. At that time, they predicted that it would put a lot of bank tellers out of business. I'm going to get back to language transition in just a minute, but the number of ATMs has drastically increased. Some branches did close, and some of the jobs that the tellers used to do have been turned over to an ATM. However, the number of branches has actually gone up, because now you can have smaller branches, because a lot of the menial stuff, like just minor jobs, is taken care of by the machine. And then when you go into the smaller bank, you have smaller number of tellers. They're all about the human relationship with the bank now. They will engage with you. They'll talk to you. They'll help you with your problems, anything that can't be handled with mundane stuff. So those dumb jobs, the stupid, like cranking out, bills for everybody, which are really low human factor. Those jobs were not human, right? Those were repetitive, tedious jobs that were extremely low paying type of menial jobs. Now the jobs that there are actually more bank tellers employed now than there were when ATMs came out, and they're more involved with human stuff. So getting back to the translation side, I think that part of this is going to happen without any of us in this call doing anything, because there are people who are, for their own competitive economic reasons, are trying to enhance translation apps or automation tools because they're trying to sell those tools. They're trying to build value in the products that they're creating. And in order to do that, they have to adapt to the human environment. Just like I mentioned earlier, the software sort of being designed in an intuitive way, so we don't have to read a 400-page manual to be able to use it. Now we can just start using it, and it gets easier and easier to engage with. So AI is going to make it easier and easier. The question is, where are the incentives coming from? Who's going to develop those things? For translation tools, there's a bunch of competitors. It's a hot market. They're trying really hard to get an advantage over each other. And Google is doing things for its own reason. Microsoft is doing things for its own reason. Siri and various different sort of tools are out there. The gaps are going to happen when there isn't an economic incentive to do something, and that makes it harder. ArcInfo was one of the first tools of geographic information systems, and you needed a degree basically to work with ArcInfo. Nowadays, geographic information systems are available to you commercially. When there's an incentive for somebody to build them, they will exist. Like Zillow is a geographic information system that looks at location and bunch of relative information about nearby schools, shopping centers, walkability scores, blah, blah. It aggregates all this stuff together to put you, the end user, in control of your house buying experience. Same with a whole bunch of things that are happening here that are going to come to us because the companies out there are building them. So what is our job? To pay attention to them, to adapt to them, to provide feedback.
I think we need to adopt them and experiment with them. I mean, I think regarding economic incentive, right? You need to think of that. We need to think of that as an industry, the big picture as to like how we can remain, relevant as the world is starting to adopt AI all around us, right? There's new challenges are going to arise from that, which are going to need a focus that if we're focusing on, the old problem, we will miss an opportunity to be able to be a meaningful part of like our brave new world. So I would just say, as an industry, we shouldn't wait until before problems present themselves and start proactively thinking about what value we can add or what we can unlock, what we can make possible.
We did get a suggestion on optical character recognition, OCR, from the chat as one of the areas. I think of that as being able to pull data off of like PDFs and some other things. Are there other use cases that people could be starting to work with for OCR?
Totally. I mean, in a virtual environment or augmented reality environment where your glasses can translate road signs for you while you're traveling in a foreign country, or translate the names or translate the ingredients list in a menu in a country where you don't speak the language. So there's a huge element there's also lots of content that is presented as text format online, but in a rasterized format. So you need to kind of transition that. But OCR has its limits too. I think there was some cases where companies have vast amounts of legal material that they need to translate. It's in paper format. They scan them all in, and it's just really painful, especially for certain languages. Here's a huge opportunity in the languages services industry is to help develop OCR in languages that aren't currently supported. But that's going to be huge, a huge opportunity, a huge issue, right? Because there's this market for low cost, at least gisting level translation of rasterized content. So
I think just to go weave a couple of things together, we were talking about how we need to be ready for change, but also sort of combining different technologies. OCR and the self-driving car, for instance, is a really good. Self-driving cars are now having to look at text of street names and so forth to know, to be extremely certain where they are, or street signs that say "do not enter," or that's kind of the evolution there. So I think it behooves us in the localization industry, taking from what Jim was saying, is to be thinking about how do we combine the elements that are already there, that we're already really good at, with elements out in the industry that are fairly mature, maybe fairly immature. How do we combine them, merge them into a new service framework, and that's when we start to generate value as an industry. I think that's really, really interesting. What is going to be the localization industry's mapping technology, or OCR technology, which have been around for a long, long time? OCR was one of the first machine learning problems that was ever undertaken to look at envelopes and zip codes and be able to get mail out to the right people. So how do we define industry? How do we be thought leaders in industry? And there's a lot of talk about, speech with the advent of Alexa and things like that. I think that's an interesting area. Well, I just said Alexa and my Alexa. I'm sorry. Sorry, Alexa.
I couldn't find that. Sorry, I searched the internet. I can't find that.
My centaur is right here listening.
That's why you've had such clever answers.
Yeah, I'm just asking Alexa.
Well,
I would just like to throw in one thing, though. Greg has made a few interesting comments here, and one of them is with regards to income for translators and MLVs, and whether or not we're just sort of driving the floor down in terms of unit price. But I would argue that that's exactly the opposite. That as each translator can produce more per day, that their value goes up. But we'll have them doing more stuff that matters. But I would like to also note too that one of the people I talked to, one client said, "How come the baseline productivity for translators hasn't changed in like decade? A lot of the sort of understanding about what a human can produce hasn't really gone up that much," and that's kind of interesting. I think it's partly because we adapt everything to weighted word count as a baseline, but I'd love to see more people doing more research on comparing productivity from different of these modalities in a more systematic way. And we do a lot. Our industry is data poor. We tend to be very I don't know, we talk about things, but yeah, we just don't really measure things. And part of the reason we don't measure them is because to really do a controlled experiment, you have to basically translate it twice and to normalize or equalize across different translators. So have two of them doing it the traditional way and two of them doing it with regular translation tools. So I think we as an industry should take a pause and try to do some of this controlled studies to try to provide the feedback back to the tools developers and to people who are the doubters to show that this really enhances quality, time, everything.
Isn't Taos one of the organizations that's trying to solve
Absolutely.
that problem with their quality methodology and productivity methodologies? They're trying to sort of glean, and the adaptive MT technologies are really focused on productivity because they've realized if we can't show productivity gain, then why would anyone adopt our tools? So there are these bodies out there that they've been around for quite some time, but they're really kind of getting their head around the data.
Well, guys, talk a little more about what Taos is offering, because I understand there are a couple legs of things. I know one of them is the data related to quality, so they're able to look and say, okay, these providers are this is where they rate. What are some other areas where Taos is engaging in this?
Yeah, so Taos is so to go back in history a bit. So there was LISA 3.0 in the quality realm. That was kind of the framework. It was a fairly static framework for measuring quality of translation. And then Taos developed a sort of more dynamic framework that allowed you to apply or change your measurement framework to the content type and adjust the weightings to give you the weightings of errors to give you the score that was meaningful to you. So that's what Taos is most well known for. But where it's really interesting, to answer your question, is they're aggregating a lot of that data across lots of different organizations, lots of different companies, so that theoretically you can compare your quality data with other companies. And there's a number of organizations that are part of that. Also, a lot of organizations are pumping their data into the Taos framework and databases. And then you can say, okay, my technical manual, the ongoing quality that I'm getting from this compares to, or compares in such a way to another organization's manual. And obviously you're trying to glean insights. So do I have the right translators? Do I have the right terminology set up? Are my TMs performing properly? And using that
Is my source significantly different than the source of whoever I'm creating myself against? Those sort of questions.
Yeah, exactly. It's a comparative exercise, right? But I'm sure there's scope for using that data to apply to machine learning. So I think Taos has been very clever in as much as they're getting a lot of information, a lot of the data. They can use that in a lot of really, really interesting ways. I don't know the legalities of Taos and how they can themselves use the data from these other companies. But you could well imagine that why not pool it all together and then build some type of centaur that's really very good at quality checking translations in a lot of languages.
Yeah. So I briefly, because I think we're going to wrap up here. The centaur, worst case scenario, best case scenario. I've heard that one of the most challenging moments in this the cars, the automated cars thing, is when self-guided cars are going to be on the road with human beings, right? I think that's actually going to be the hardest part of the whole challenge in getting to that. What are some of the things you see as like worst case scenario, best case scenario in this?
Maybe I'll add worst case scenario. I think might look like that, like the Terry Gilliam movie Brazil, where humans are relegated basically in some nightmarish bureaucracy, right? That is where the rules are basically, sorry, you can't do that because the machine says you can't. So I'll contribute that to the worst case scenario.
I would bookend it from my perspective with what Eric started out with the story about the historical story about the Luddites. And I think, my interpretation of that is just, I want to be optimistic and positive about it. We have a responsibility, a social responsibility, organizational responsibility to not create Luddites out of slices of our society. And that's, I think, a best case scenario for us, where we have this AI stroke human mashup, and everyone's happy about it, and we've given them opportunities.
And we solve all sorts of real world problems. I mean, in our industry, to me, the best case scenario is language is not a barrier for progress and the contribution of progress around the world.
I would say the worst case scenario is a general, one of the automation risks. You see automation starting to replace jobs when a market has been saturated. So in the automotive industry, for example, once the market is saturated and pretty much everybody who wants a car has a car, you're not growing the total number of cars in the street, then you see that the companies are starting to replace humans with machines, and the total number of auto employers starts going down so that they can gain competitive advantage over a static kind of zero-sum environment. We reach a zero-sum kind of game when the system isn't growing, and to create new jobs, and the people aren't able to move in to new jobs. The jobs that are destroyed are not generally the ones that are created. The new ones require different skills. So the ability for people to adapt to those new jobs will be really important in the coming kind of automation revolution. There is a risk also that in this, as Connor mentioned earlier, in the gig economy, that things like healthcare and things like which is probably a uniquely American problem, honestly, but everybody else in the world seems to be able to deal with this. But the problem of support, the social supports that are there for people who are only making jobs as Uber drivers instead of as taxi drivers, it becomes more complex societally, politically. There could be a backlash. The Luddite rebellion, people saying they're excluded. Theirs are the jobs that are being destroyed, and they may rebel. And there could be some friction in the system from that. If automation is successful at replacing many of us, and there just aren't enough jobs to go around, then there higher unemployment even within a certain sector. You figure those people could go on different sectors if those are growing instead. But there is a risk that there's a net sort of limit, but I don't think we're there yet. I think it's a long way before we hit that point. So really it's about controlling perceptions and to help invest in helping people to fill the jobs that are available now, the things that to help them move out of an older obsolete economy. We don't need more manual like sewers. Like we need people who can use sewing machines. And so let's not be Tom Henrys about this. Let's be good as a society to help move people along with us and not leave them behind.
Well, we're grateful for everybody who attended this. The time I think was well spent here with what they call you guys, the Mountain Mafia. And there are a couple of things I'd like to highlight. You can keep the conversation going. You can give us your feedback. Probably the clearest way to do that is on #loc Hangout, LOC Hangout. Let us know what you think. We'd love to incorporate your ideas and thoughts into the next Hangout that we do. Also, Moravia has published on SlideShare a Don't Rage Against the Machine SlideShare. So check that out, see what we're saying and thinking in this area, what sort of inspired this talk. And feel free to reach out to any one of us. Thanks for joining, and hope to see you at the next Loc Hangout, if not sooner.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.